Hi, I'm Lisa Garber, and this is Law News. I'm here with Ken Belkin, criminal defense attorney out of New York. Great to be here with you.
Good to be here with you, Lisa.
We're talking about the defense arguments right now and the slew of witnesses and how they could have poked holes in some of their backgrounds, the way that they spoke about this case. And I know we were just hearing from Corey Rivers, who was, I believe, Zach Adams' cellmate in prison. You had some comments on some of those issues.
Yeah, look, I got a little bit of flack since the break that, Corey Rivers is very believable, very credible. And yes, the record reflects that this is a guy whose sentence was not impacted. He wasn't given any consideration. Now, that's what the record reflects. In criminal proceedings, sometimes when people cooperate, there are things that don't make it into the record. There are charges that, in consideration for their cooperation, that are just sort of swept under and just quieted down. And I've seen it happen in cases of my own, and that's the way prosecutors operate sometimes in order to build their case. It's not the most ethical method of operation, and I'm not saying they did that here. But what I am saying, this guy, Corey Rivers, he impersonated another person. He gave a fake, an ID that was not his, and he misrepresented his identity to law enforcement. This guy lies to law enforcement. What would stop him from lying to law enforcement in the case of the information he provided about Zachary Adams?
It's a very good point, and the jury has to really contextualize these witnesses because that's the only way to fully understand what's going on. I think it's a similar issue with Jason Autry, right? Because, we were talking a lot about drug use with the last guest, but he's really their linchpin.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Star.
He's the star witness, and he's skipping away without the death penalty.
Well, look, in a prosecutor's office, you have to make these tough decisions. How am I going to build the case? I'm not going to be able to get both of them, but maybe I can get one of them. And that's sort of the gamble that you have to take, and they took that in this case, and they went with Jason Autry. But it's just so difficult for me seeing every witness is so dirty. They don't have one clean witness, and in my mind, that amounts to reasonable doubt.
Oh, really?
Unfortunately, yeah. But I think they're going to get a conviction here, regardless. If me and my New York defense attorney opinion sees reasonable doubt, I probably see it everywhere. But, they're going to get a conviction. The sense in the community is that they want these people to pay. The other thing that bothers me is, from what we've seen, it doesn't seem to me like they did such an adequate investigation into her disappearance and other possible suspects. They sort of took this approach where, hey, let's round up the scoundrels, the druggies, the usual malcontents in our neighborhood, and let's look at them. That's starting an investigation from a place of bias. And when you start an investigation or, any scientific experiment from a place of bias, you're not going to get really an objective result.
Certainly, and also part of the problem that we've been seeing throughout the testimony is some blame placed on the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation for how they moved with this investigation and kind of the time they took, some of the missteps that they made, bearing on your point for sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, and there's a lot of pressure on them to solve this case. This case garnered significant media attention. We're talking about it right now, for a reason. It's really captured the attention of a large portion of this country. And I think when you have a case like that, the pressure on you as law enforcement to reach a resolution, and the pressure on the prosecutor's office to get a verdict, it's like 1,000 times greater than normally.
Right.
And that means, they might cut corners. They might use these jailhouse snitches and cooperators to try and bolster their case.
Right. And I know this is something you didn't really care that much about it. We've been talking about it a little bit this morning, this Clint Bobo issue, Holly Bobo's brother, and how he potentially might have played a part. And I know you mentioned a little bit, maybe there wasn't as much of an investigation done as there should have been into some of these key elements of the case. If you want to talk about Clint, that's fine. If not, what are you specifically thinking of when you say that?
That Clint Bobo is not an issue in my mind. I mean, look, it could be a motive that for the prosecution. It could be a potential motive. Maybe something went bad in their relationship, trying to, give him the old college education on how to cook meth. Maybe there was some disagreements on curriculum and teaching methods.
But isn't that strange then that these cast of characters keep winding up together?
Yeah, well, it's a very small community. I think that the freelance reporter Paul Stanley, no relation to the KISS member, you know, he said it's community. The county has about 7,500 residents. Everybody knows everyone in this neighborhood.
Right, right. Just in the spirit of that, just so that our viewers can be reminded of exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about Clint Bobo's place in this case, and why it's a little suspicious that not only did he see his sister wander off into the woods with someone in a camo jacket, think it immediately was her boyfriend, and only when his mom told him to call the police did he do so, but then also he winds up in Jason Autry's testimony talking about manufacturing meth. So we're going to cut to that clip of Jason describing how he knew Clint, what happened with the manufacturing meth ordeal.
Consider what he said for the truth of it, okay? All right.
What did Zach, or how did Zach respond?
He said the real reason that we were there was to show Clint how to manufacture meth. He said we got there early, she come outside screaming and raising hell, and we took her.
Right. That's not offered for the truth of it. Besides that, it's allegedly a statement of the defendant, not a third party, okay?
Okay. And how did you respond to that information?
Just, I just listened to it. I mean, I did not. In fact, I brought up the issue that we had been there long enough, let's go. My truck was sitting in plain view down at a locked gate on private property. So, I mean, once the breath was caught and a few minutes of rest, it was time to go.
Time to take the trail cam that you stole and hit the road.
That's correct.
Did y'all do that?
That's
Took
correct.
the deer stand and the trail cam and left.
That's correct.
Did you have any other conversations with Zach about what happened to Holly?
I have not.
At any point in time, did you go, you told us about the barn, did you go look somewhere else because of information you received?
I did.
Okay, first of all, who gave you the information?
I obtained the information from Zach 2 days after the 13th, the 15th in the wooded area.
So you mentioned earlier that Zach told you you
That-
dumped her at Kelly's Ridge.
Near Kelly's Ridge.
All right. So what is Kelly's Ridge? Where is Kelly's Ridge?
Kelly's Ridge is in Benton County, Tennessee. It's hunting club maybe. It's a long. There's a gate there and a great road that runs down through the property for a long ways. I mean, that's just backwoods. As far as you know, for a long ways, yeah.
At some point, did you go to Kelly's Ridge?
I
Or
did.
try to?
I tried. I come through there one day, and I noticed some birds sitting near a pond bank.
I mean, like sparrows or some other kind of bird?
Buzzards.
Buzzards.
Well, this was within a week of the disappearance.
Okay.
I thought that that's where the body was. So I stopped at the house and asked the people, could I go
Let's
to...
slow down. So you had the information about Kelly's Ridge.
That's correct.
Did you drive? You said I was driving through there. Did you drive through there on purpose to look around, or did you just happen to be driving through there? If you remember.
I mean, I wasn't purposely looking. I mean, when I seen that, it all flashed before the mind. I mean, yeah, I never went out with the search parties or.
No, I understand that. I'm saying, did you go to that area because Zach Adams had told you we dumped Holly near Kelly's Ridge?
I rode through there, yeah,
Okay, okay.
looking to see what I could see.
All right, and you said that you saw buzzards close to a lake.
There's 2 ponds there on the property at the entrance of Kelly Road, at Kelly Ridge. I seen buzzards sitting in an old dead tree in the backside of one of them ponds.
So what did that mean to you?
Dead. Something dead.
You said you walked up to the house. So is there a house close to those?
There's a
ponds?
house at the entrance of Kelly Road. I got out and I knocked on the door and I asked the person living there if I could go fishing down there.
First, you said you asked the person, so somebody answered the door?
There was, yes.
And, what
There-
did they say?
They told me no, that there had been some river otters or creek otters come through there and wiped all the fish out. They didn't want nobody on the property. At that time, I got back in the vehicle and left.
And this person that you talked to, is it a male or a female?
I'm not sure. I think there was both people there.
But they wouldn't let you?
They would not, they would not let me up to the door. I mean, I was met from a distance. Just as soon as I pulled up, they come out to the screen door.
May I have one moment, Your Honor?
Good afternoon, I'm Lisa Garber, and this is Law News. I'm here with Ken Belkin, criminal defense attorney. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Good. Well, we're talking about the death penalty.
Yeah, not so good for Zachary Adams.
Not so good. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And just a little statistics for the viewers. There are 69 people currently on death row in Tennessee, and the last execution hasn't been since 2009. So Ken and I have been talking a little bit about what the chances are if Zachary Adams is found guilty, which we're kind of thinking that might be the case here, what the penalty phase is going to look like, what the odds are about the death penalty coming into play.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's gonna, if they find him guilty of first-degree murder, then it becomes an analysis of are there aggravating factors that warrant the imposition of the death penalty. Tennessee has about 15 or so factors that they consider to be aggravating enough to warrant the death penalty. And of those factors, there are a couple, I think, that definitely apply to Mr. Adams should he be convicted of first-degree murder. The especially heinous nature of the act. This was done, there was sexual assault,
Right.
there was kidnapping. They pretty much tortured this poor girl, allegedly right now. Then there's if other felonies were committed in the commission of the first-degree murder, which, look, sexual assault, again, a felony. Kidnapping, a felony. Then there is if the body was mutilated after death. And we've heard testimony that indicated that the corpse was cut in half. So I think there's a very strong chance if he's convicted that they're going to give him the death penalty.
And so what do you think if we go in, we're looking at the next phase of what happens if he is convicted, what that process looks like, and what the defense wants to do in that circumstance?
Well, you want to paint him in as sympathetic a light as possible and just say this is a kid, came from a very troubled background. He had a very severe drug problem that he probably developed as some sort of coping mechanism to deal with early childhood trauma. He was obviously not from the best family,
Right.
And you just got to bring all these facts to bear. You basically, we call it mining someone's life for sympathy and sorrow.
And it's hard to be sympathetic at this point when you hear some of the testimony. We've been going back through some of the clips with Jason Autry. You're talking about how she was wrapped up in the blanket and they thought she might still be alive and they shot her point blank in the head.
Yeah.
I mean, these things, it's going to be, I think, very difficult to paint him in any sort of sympathetic light, especially because we've heard all of these friends of his and prison cellmates talking about drug use, talking about the stories that he told about Holly Bobo.
Yeah, I mean, I think any family members he has that would be affected by his loss of by him being executed by the state, you're going to have to get statements, maybe have people talk about the effect it would have on their lives of him being executed. Whatever you can do to paint this guy in a sympathetic light and show that his life is even 0.5% worth saving. Personally, I think this guy should spend the rest of his life in jail. That's probably far greater of a punishment than letting him off easy
Right.
with a knife's quick, swift death by lethal injection.
Right. And I'm curious, we talked a little bit about the shooting and the gun issue as well, and how, there really wasn't any DNA evidence on it. As defense counsel, how would you tackle that piece of this case?
Well, look, DNA evidence, people have this weird conception of DNA evidence that if there is DNA, he must have done it. I've said this to Aaron Keller a lot of times, just by virtue of you sitting across the table from me, you're going to be covered in my DNA for weeks. Sorry to break that to you. But that is the nature of DNA, and
Right.
DNA experts will testify that. The fact that there's no DNA on the gun, well, I don't know that that's super helpful for the defense, because that could very easily be explained away by the prosecution. This gun was found 5 years after the fact, in an outdoor environment, exposed to the elements. DNA will wash off eventually. So feel safe in that, knowing my DNA
Right.
will wash off
Well,
eventually.
Sounds like there's a lot of it. It's sticking around.
Yeah.
So, but we're talking about these pieces and, what's going to happen, how it's going to bring to bear on potential sentencing if he is found guilty. But the fact that there really is no hard evidence. I know the gun has been laying around for quite some
Well,
time.
look, if he's convicted, he's convicted. And, the facts have been established at trial. And if those facts indicate that, this was done in an especially heinous manner,
Sure.
which I think we could all agree on if he's convicted, and this is what's established, this is a very, very heinous murder.
Right.
And it was done certainly in the commission of other felonies, at least if he's convicted of the other felonies, that is, you'll have the kidnapping, you'll have the sexual assault. And look, you heard testimony from the medical experts, the forensic experts. Her body was cut up. It was mutilated after death.
There was also some talk, and I'm trying to find what clip this was in, but there was some talk of a video surfacing of Holly Bobo and the raping allegations and what was going on, in a video that surfaced where she looked terrified, she was tied up.
Yeah, he said this to someone he was in jail with, I believe.
Right.
But, look, I don't give much credibility to people.
You're not digging the teardrop tattoos for
I'm
grandma.
not digging the teardrop tattoo, and I say that as someone who has a couple of tattoos. It's not a good look.
Right.
You know, especially not in the Jewish New Year.
Right. And it's difficult to really understand how Jason Autry's testimony is really going to have an impact on the jury, because there are so many conflicting factors with him. I'm so torn about him because on the one hand, we know he had involvement in this. Whatever his role was, he was there. He was part of these, it was a small town. He was definitely talking with all of these people. He was definitely involved in some way. But on the flip side, he doesn't get charged with the death penalty. He's now telling this story. I mean, what do you think the jury is really thinking about right now, based on your experience in trials?
They're probably thinking about how terrible pizza is in Tennessee compared to New York.
Yeah.
But look, at the end of the day, I think these guys were probably involved in a lot of terrible things. And I think law enforcement in this community was probably aware that they were involved in a lot of terrible things. Maybe some of those terrible things weren't things that they had evidence enough to charge or make arrests on. But I think at the end of the day, they wanted to get this group of individuals. And they did get them for the murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault of Holly Bobo. Whether or not they actually did it, whether or not there's proof beyond a reasonable doubt here, the emotions in the community are going to take this to a verdict of guilty. And, these guys are going to go down. And maybe they're going down not just for that, but for things they were never even charged with.
That's true. It's difficult to say. There's so much conflict and there's so much hearsay as well. I think that's been a prevalent issue in this case.
A lot of hearsay. A lot of
hearsay.
Statements against interest coming in under the hearsay exception, But look, that's why we have exceptions to hearsay.
Do you think part of that could be colored by the fact that there was such an absence of concrete, any sort of physical evidence?
Yeah, I mean, look, you when you have a case, you go with the case you have.
Right.
And this was the case they had. And look, so much pressure on this prosecutor's office. They had to get a result. They have to put a win up on the board here.
Right, tiny town, big, splashy, awful murder stretched across national news for years.
Yeah, when's the last time this town was in the subject of a major news story?
Exactly.
A lot of people's political careers are probably on the line here.
Exactly, and I do want to make it clear, Ken has said, it's difficult for the defense. When you're there, you're on the spot, it's difficult to understand exactly what they're dealing with, but at the same time, probably some spotty issues in them trying
Allegedly,
to poke holes.
this attorney is one of the best defense attorneys in the state of Tennessee. Now, I don't know her record. I don't know how she's performed in other trials, but I'll tell you this. You know, I have friends who are not considered the best defense attorney in New York City. They would rip her apart.
Yeah.
She really should have come down a lot harder on these jailhouse snitches and cooperators. They are all well-documented liars. They're criminals. She should have drilled it into the jury's head that this person is a liar.
Right. And that definitely didn't come across, at least to me. That
Yeah.
wasn't part of the strategy.
She should have been much more forceful. I don't know why she held back. Maybe it's Southern politeness, something I don't suffer from, apparently. But, you know, for whatever reason, she did not go for it. And you have to go for it. You're defending someone. You have to fight for them zealously.
Definitely. And this is it. I mean, this is it.
It's life or death here.
Right. Literally life or death on the
Yeah.
line. Here with Ken Belkin, owner of his own law firm in New York City, criminal defense lawyer, amongst other things. And now we're trying to poke some holes in the defense's analysis and their strategy in this case. Just to give the audience a little more context, going to go back to some of the defense closings, and then I'll be back with Ken.